The bar was too loud for a Wednesday. She knew that the moment she walked in, the kind of knowing that lived in the chest, not the head. Bass from the speakers rattled the ice in her glass before she even ordered. The air was thick with body heat and cheap whiskey and something underneath it all that she couldn't name. Something that made the hairs on the back of her neck lift, one by one, like a warning her body understood before her mind caught up. She ignored it. She was good at ignoring things. The stool at the far end of the bar was empty, the one tucked into the corner where the light didn't quite reach. She took it without thinking. Old habit. Omega habit. Find the wall. Put your back to something solid. Never stand in the center of a room where anything can come at you from any direction. Her glass arrived. Bourbon. 2 fingers. She hadn't asked for a specific brand, and the bartender hadn't asked her preference. He just looked at her face and poured something that cost more than the well drinks. Maybe she looked like she needed it. Maybe she looked like she could afford it. Either way, she didn't correct him. She took a sip and let the burn settle in her throat like punctuation. Around her, the Wednesday night crowd moved in clusters. Groups of people leaning into each other, sharing jokes she couldn't hear over the music, laughing with their whole bodies. Normal people. People who came to bars on weeknights because they wanted to, not because the alternative was sitting alone in an apartment that still smelled faintly like someone who didn't live there anymore. Her best friend slid onto the stool beside her like a small hurricane. You look like you're planning a funeral. I'm not. Whose? No one's. She took another sip. I'm fine. Elara. The way her best friend Jade said her name carried the full weight of 3 years of friendship. A name used like a hand on the shoulder. I see you. Stop lying. Elara set her glass down. Jade was already waving at the bartender with the energy of someone who hadn't spent the last 4 months watching their career quietly dismantle itself. Who hadn't received a letter 2 weeks ago informing her that her position as junior territorial liaison for the Western Pack Council was being, and she could still hear the exact bureaucratic language, restructured for optimal pack efficiency. Restructured. Like she was furniture. Like 6 years of work could be folded up and put in a different room. 2 more of whatever she's having, Jade told the bartender. Then, to Elara, we're celebrating. Celebrating what? The fact that you're still breathing. That counts. Jade picked up the fresh glass the moment it landed. Drink. Elara drank. The bourbon was warmer this time. Or maybe she was. 3 drinks became 4. Jade was talking. Something about a man she'd met at a pack gathering last month, something about the way he smelled like cedar and bad decisions, and Elara was listening with the part of her brain that wasn't quietly cataloging everything she'd lost. The job. The apartment she'd have to leave in 60 days if she didn't find new income. The carefully constructed life she'd built in Ashford City, brick by brick, for 6 years. Gone. Restructured. The bar had filled further by 10 o'clock. The noise was a living thing now, pressing in from all sides. She felt it before she heard it. A shift in the air. Slight. Like the difference in pressure before a storm front moves through. Her glass was empty again. Jade was laughing at something on her phone. And that's when Elara made the first mistake of the night. She looked up. Across the bar, through the crowd, through the noise, through the amber-tinted light, a man sat alone at a corner table. Still. Completely, unnaturally still. Like the noise didn't touch him. Like the room existed around him rather than including him. She couldn't see his face clearly from here. But she could smell him. Pine. Cold water. Something ancient underneath both. Her next breath came out wrong. And the man, slowly, deliberately, turned his head. Straight toward her. Her glass slipped. 1 inch. No further. But her hand was shaking. She caught the glass before it hit the bar. Barely. Her fingers wrapped around it with the kind of reflex that came from years of holding things together at the last possible second. She set it down carefully. Deliberately. Like if she was precise enough about that one small thing, the rest of her, the part that was suddenly, inexplicably trembling, wouldn't notice what her eyes had just done. She looked away. Back to Jade. Back to the phone screen Jade was laughing at. Back to the ordinary, manageable world of Wednesday night bourbon and best friends and not thinking about the 60-day notice folded in her coat pocket. Normal. She was fine. Everything was fine. Then why is your heart doing that? She pressed her hand flat against the bar top. Solid wood. Room temperature. Real. She focused on the texture of it, the slight roughness where the varnish had worn down at the edges, and breathed through her nose without meaning to. That was the mistake. because the scent hit her the second she inhaled. Pine. Cold water. That deep, wordless something underneath that she didn't have a name for, only a reaction. It moved through her the way the first cold day of October moved through an open window. Sudden. Clean. Rearranging everything it touched. Her fingers curled against the bar. Don't look back. She looked back. He was still watching her. Not the way men at bars usually watched women. That surface level, calculating once-over that she'd learned to deflect before she was 19. This was different. This was the way you watched something you were trying to understand. Patient. Unhurried. Like he had already decided he wasn't going anywhere and was simply waiting for her to catch up to a fact he already knew. It made her want to stand up and leave. It made her want to stay absolutely still. Both instincts fired at exactly the same time and canceled each other out, leaving her frozen on the bar stool with her empty glass and her hammering pulse and absolutely no idea what her face was doing. Jade touched her arm. You okay? Yeah. The word came out steady. She was proud of that. Just warm. It is warm in here. Jade glanced around, then back. Do you want to move outside? No, too fast. She softened it. No, I'm good. Jade accepted this with the easy grace of someone 3 drinks in and unthreatened by the world. She went back to her phone. Elara went back to the problem of the man at the corner table. She should not have had the 4th drink. That was becoming clear. Because the 4th drink was the one that had apparently dismantled whatever internal filter usually stood between her thoughts and her actions. She could feel it, that warm, reckless loosening in her chest. The part of her that was tired. Tired of being careful. Tired of taking up exactly the right amount of space and no more. Tired of 6 years of precision and correctness that had still ended with a restructuring letter in 60 days to figure out the rest of her life. Jade said something. She caught the tail end of it. You should just go talk to him. Elara's head turned sharply. What? Jade nodded across the bar with zero subtlety. Corner table. He hasn't stopped looking at you for 20 minutes. She tilted her glass. Go. I'm not going to walk up to a stranger at a bar. Why not? Elara opened her mouth. Closed it. Why not? 4 drinks. 60 days. 6 years of careful and correct and restructured anyway. Why not? She slid off the stool before the reasonable part of her brain could file an objection. The walk across the bar took 11 steps. She counted them. Counting was the thing she did when the rest of her was operating on something other than logic. She stopped at the edge of his table. He looked up. Up close, his face was. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have the vocabulary for it yet. What she had was the scent, stronger now, and the eyes, which were a shade of gray that didn't seem possible indoors, and the stillness, God, the stillness of him, like the room had organized itself quietly around where he sat. Her mouth opened. 4 drinks spoke first. You should marry me, she said. I'm a great investment. Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that has weight. He looked at her for a long moment, unhurried, unreadable. And then something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than that. Sit down, he said. His voice was low. Certain. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. She sat. And the part of her that had been running on bourbon and recklessness went very, very quiet. Because he reached into his jacket. And placed a business card on the table between them. Gold embossed lettering. 2 words beneath a crest she recognized from every official pact document she'd ever handled in 6 years of territorial liaison work. 2 words that stopped her breath completely. Alphaking. She stared at the card. The gold lettering caught the bar light and threw it back at her like a small, merciless mirror. She didn't pick it up. Couldn't. Her fingers were pressed flat against her thighs beneath the table, and she was doing the thing she did when the ground moved, breathing in counts of 4, finding something solid to anchor to, refusing to let her face do anything her brain hadn't approved first. The card sat between them like a live wire. Alphaking. She knew that crest. She'd spent 6 years filing documents stamped with that exact seal. Territorial agreements. PAC law amendments. Resource allocation reports that crossed 3 state lines. She had organized, cross-referenced, and submitted more paperwork bearing that emblem than she could count. She had never once considered that the person behind it might smell like pine and cold water and something that made her want to press her face against his throat and stay there. She pushed the thought down so hard it didn't even bounce. This isn't funny, she said. No, he hadn't moved. Hands on the table. Perfectly calm. It isn't. You're telling me she stopped. Started again. You're sitting alone. In a bar. On a Wednesday. Yes. Alpha kings don't sit alone in bars on Wednesdays. And yet. The not quite smile again. Like he found her specifically, her arguments, her visible attempt at composure mildly, privately entertaining. Which made her want to flip the table. Which was insane. She had never wanted to flip a table in her life. She was a professional. She was composed. She had once sat through a 7-hour pack council mediation without raising her voice. She was also, apparently, the woman who had just proposed marriage to the Alpha King of the Western continent as a joke. I was being sarcastic, she said. Earlier. What I said. I know. It wasn't a real proposal. I understand that. Good. She reached for the card. Stopped herself. Left it there. Then we're clear. We're clear, he agreed. She stood up. Sat back down. He watched this without comment. Why did you tell me to sit, she asked. Before. Why didn't you just, she gestured vaguely at the space between them, the bar, the entire situation. Because you were interesting. Simple. Factual. Like interest was a thing he rationed carefully and she had somehow qualified without trying. And because you're Elara Voss. The sound of her own name in his mouth did something to her sternum. She ignored it viciously. You know who I am. Western Pack Council. Junior Territorial Liaison. A pause. Former. The word landed exactly where he'd placed it. Precise. Not cruel, just accurate, which was somehow worse. Her jaw tightened. You knew before I walked over. Your scent came to me first. He said it simply. Like scent recognition across a crowded bar was a normal thing to mention to someone you'd met 40 seconds ago. For him, she supposed, it was. Alpha King. His senses would register what hers could only barely detect. I placed you after. Great. She picked up the card. Put it in her coat pocket without looking at it. Well. This has been, I'm going to go back to my friend now. Your position was eliminated because of me. She went completely still. The noise of the bar continued around them. Someone laughed too loudly near the door. The bass from the speakers kept its rhythm. Everything kept moving except the small, airless space at this corner table where Elara sat with her coat pocket suddenly feeling very heavy. She turned back slowly. What did you say? He didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. It was already echoing in the space behind her eyes, rearranging things she'd spent 2 weeks carefully arranging into a shape she could manage. Your position was eliminated because of me. Explain that. Her voice came out quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet that she'd learned from years of being underestimated, the register that meant she was not asking twice. He held her gaze. Sit down, Ms. Voss. Her heart was doing something irrational behind her ribs. She sat. And outside, through the bar's rain-streaked window, 2 black SUVs pulled silently to the curb. Doors opening. Figures stepping out. Moving toward the entrance with the focused, unhurried certainty of people who already knew exactly who they were coming for. She saw them first in the mirror behind the bar. 3 men. Dark clothing. Moving through the Wednesday night crowd with the kind of practiced stillness that didn't belong in a place like this, not aggressive, not rushed, just deliberate in a way that parted the crowd without anyone quite understanding why they were stepping aside. Her body understood before her mind did. Every Omega instinct she'd spent years training herself to suppress fired at once. A cold rush up her spine, a tightening across her shoulders, the sudden animal awareness of exits. Door behind her. Window to the left. Bar too crowded to move through quickly. She calculated all of this in approximately 2 seconds. Then she felt him move. Not dramatically. Not with any urgency she could point to. He simply shifted, barely an inch, and his scent expanded around her like something unfurling. Pine and cold water and that deep, wordless underneath. A wall she hadn't asked for and couldn't explain. Her breath snagged on it. Don't turn around, he said quietly. I already saw them. A pause. Something moved through his expression that she didn't have enough information to read. How? Mirror. She kept her eyes forward. Bar industry standard. Whoever designed this place wanted people to see what was coming. She picked up her empty glass and held it like she was considering ordering another. Normal. Just a woman at a bar. They're yours? No. One word. The weight of it settled differently than she expected. Then whose? He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. She filed it away and kept her breathing even and her posture loose and her eyes moving through the mirror in careful, unhurried sweeps the way her former supervisor had taught her during her first week on the council. You're not watching security footage, boss. You're watching a room. There's a difference. There's a corridor behind the kitchen, he said. Service exit onto the alley. 40 feet. I know where the service exit is. He looked at her then. Actually looked the way he'd looked from across the bar, that patient, recalibrating attention. Like she kept answering questions he hadn't finished asking. Of course you do, he said. It wasn't sarcasm. That almost made it worse. My friend is at the bar, Elara said. She'll be fine. They're not here for her. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead it did something more complicated, settled something in her chest that had been vibrating at a frequency she couldn't control since she'd first caught his scent across the room. She didn't trust that settling. She noted it and set it aside. Who are they here for? He was already standing. Smooth, unhurried, like a man pushing back from a dinner table. He dropped enough cash on the surface to cover the entire bar's tab for the evening without counting it. Move when I move, he said quietly. Not before. I don't take orders. Ms. Voss. His voice stayed low. Even, I will explain everything. But I need you to trust me for the next 4 minutes. She looked at the mirror. The 3 men had stopped at the bar. One of them was talking to the bartender. Showing something, a phone screen, maybe. A photo. Her jaw tightened. 4 minutes, she said. They moved. He was right about the corridor. Right about the 40 feet. She stayed a half step behind him and slightly left. Not because he told her to, but because that position gave her the clearest sightline to anything coming from either direction, and old habits from 6 years of pack politics had wired certain instincts into her bones. The kitchen was hot and loud and smelled like fryer oil and industrial cleaner. 2 line cooks looked up. Neither said anything. Whether that was because of him or because staff in places like this learned quickly not to notice things, she didn't know. The service door opened to an alley. Cold air hit her face like a correction. She breathed it in, and underneath the city smell, underneath the rain and the wet asphalt and the exhaust from the street beyond, his scent was still there. Still wrapped around her without touching her. She turned to face him in the dark. Start talking, she said. He opened his mouth. A sound cut through the alley, sharp, close, unmistakable. The metallic click of a lock engaging. Behind them, the service door sealed shut. And in front of them, at the alley's far end, a 4th figure stepped out of the shadows. Standing between them and the street. Standing between them and everything, the figure didn't move. Neither did he. Elara stood between them both, caught in the narrow corridor of wet brick and cold air and the specific, suffocating tension of a situation that had stopped being about her approximately 3 acts ago. Rain had started somewhere in the last 60 seconds. She could feel it on her face. Fine and cold and indifferent. Her eyes moved to the figure at the alley's end. Male. Broad. Standing with the relaxed, deliberate stillness of someone who had chosen this position carefully and was comfortable waiting in it. He wasn't threatening with movement. He was threatening with patience, the kind that said I've done this before and I know how it ends. She hated that she recognized the type. She'd sat across conference tables from men like this for 6 years. Elara. His voice came from just behind her left shoulder. Low. Even. Her name in his mouth still did the thing to her sternum that she was actively refusing to examine. Step back. Toward you? Yes. That's your solution? Currently. A beat. Yes. She stepped back. Not because he'd told her to. Because the geometry of the alley gave her exactly 2 options, and the one that involved moving toward the patient, waiting figure was the one her instincts rejected without consultation. Her shoulder blade nearly touched his chest. His scent closed around her completely. She felt her own heartbeat change, not speed up, not slow down, but shift, like a metronome finding a different tempo without being touched, and she catalogued that fact with the cold, precise part of her mind that was still functioning and filed it under things to examine when not standing in a wet alley with unknown threats on 2 sides. The figure at the end spoke. Caius. A voice like gravel smoothed by years of use. Familiar with itself. You missed the summit. So that was his name. Caius. She stored it. I didn't miss it, the man behind her said. I chose not to attend. The council considers that the same thing. The council considers many things. A pause. That doesn't make them correct. The figure shifted his weight. Just slightly. His eyes moved to Elara, a brief, assessing sweep that made her want to take another step back, which she refused to do. She held her ground and looked directly at him and let her face say everything her voice wasn't saying yet. I see you. I'm not afraid of you. And I'm paying attention. His gaze returned to Caius. You brought a civilian. She's not a civilian. She's not pack-ranked. That's not the same thing. Something in Caius's voice had changed, barely, but she caught it. A tightening at the edges. The first indication she'd had all evening that something could move beneath that impossible stillness. Stand down, Riven. Riven. She filed that too. Riven looked at her one more time. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. Not gone. Just aside. Which was its own kind of statement. Caius moved first. She stayed with him, that half step behind and left that she'd fallen into without deciding to, through the alley's far end and onto a side street that was blessedly empty and rain-washed and open in all directions. She turned on him the moment they cleared the corner. The summit, she said. The Western Continental Summit. 3 weeks ago. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. That's why my position was eliminated. The pieces were assembling themselves in real time, clicking into place with the horrible, irreversible logic of things that had always been true. The council restructured the entire liaison division because you refused to attend. They needed someone to absorb the political fallout. Junior staff. Expendable. Her voice stayed level. Me. Rain on her face. Rain on the street. His silence, which was not the same as absence. I didn't know your name then, he said. Does that matter? A long pause. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. And somehow, that honesty cracked something open in her chest that anger would have kept sealed. She looked away. 6 years, she said. To the rain. To the street. To no one in particular. I gave them 6 years. His next breath was audible. And when she looked back, something in his face had shifted. Not pity. Worse than pity. Recognition. Like 6 years lost was a number he understood from the inside. She didn't ask about it. The recognition on his face, the deep, interior knowing that had moved through his expression like weather, she saw it and she left it alone. Because she was standing in the rain on an empty side street at nearly midnight with a man she'd met an hour ago when her emotional reserves were already running on fumes and she did not have the capacity to excavate someone else's history right now. She had her own rubble to stand in. There's a car, Caius said. 2 blocks east. I'd like to take you somewhere dry and explain what I can. What you can, she repeated. There are things I'm not yet at liberty to. Stop. She held up one hand. Don't give me the official version. I spent 6 years translating official versions into what they actually meant. I know what not at liberty sounds like. She looked at him directly. Either you talk to me like a person or I walk back into that bar and find my friend and we never had this conversation. Something shifted in his jaw. A small tension. Released. Fair, he said. The car was where he said it would be. Black. Quiet engine. A driver who didn't turn around or speak, which she appreciated more than she expected to. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly seedied and, underneath it all, pine. His scent, embedded in a space he occupied regularly. She pressed herself against the opposite door and looked out the window. The summit, he said, from his side of the car. I refused to attend because the agenda included a vote on Pact Territorial Expansion Act 7. Are you familiar with it? Vaguely. She kept her eyes on the passing street. It would authorize Alpha-ranked acquisition of disputed Omega-occupied territories. Council's vote, Alphas acquire, current residents have 30 days to relocate. Yes. I always thought that act was theoretical. Nobody would actually. 3 council members were prepared to pass it that night. The street outside blurred slightly. She blinked. My absence stalled the vote, he continued. Without my proxy, they didn't have quorum. The vote failed. But the council needed to redirect the political frustration somewhere. A pause. They restructured the divisions that reported directly to my office. Eliminated positions that had been advocating internally against the act. She turned from the window. I was advocating against it, she said slowly. In my reports. For 8 months. I flagged the humanitarian implications every quarter. I know. You read my reports. Every one. The car moved through a quiet intersection. Rain on the roof. The driver's eyes stayed forward. Elara sat with the information rearranging itself inside her, not comfortably, not cleanly, but with the specific weight of things that were true and couldn't be untrue now that she knew them. They eliminated my position because I was right, she said. Yes. And you let them. The silence that followed was different from his other silences. Those had been considered, controlled. This one had texture. Roughness at the edges. I didn't know your name, he said again. You said that already. I know. He turned to look at her. Fully, the way he had across the bar, that patient, unhurried attention that she was beginning to understand was not a tactic. It was just how he saw things. Completely. I'm saying it again because I want you to understand that it's not an excuse. I'm telling you what's true, not what's justified. She looked at him. At the rain-darkened window behind him. At the city moving past. At his hands, resting on his knees, still, the way all of him was still, but she could see the tension in them now. The way his fingers weren't quite relaxed. He was not as untouched by this as he looked. She filed that away somewhere quieter than her other files. What did you mean, she said carefully, when you said you recognized my name? At the bar. You said you placed me. She paused. But I think you already knew. His hands shifted. One finger. Barely. Your last report, he said quietly. The one they didn't let you submit. He reached into his jacket. Produced a folded document. Set it on the seat between them. I received it anyway. She stared at the paper. Her handwriting on the outside fold. 8 months of work she'd been told had been discarded. Her throat closed. Not from sadness. From something that had no clean name. Somewhere between fury and relief and the terrifying realization that someone had been paying attention all along. And she hadn't known. She hadn't known. She picked up the document. Her own handwriting looked strange to her, familiar the way childhood photographs look familiar. Recognizable but distant. Like something that had belonged to a version of herself she'd quietly retired. She didn't open it. She held it. How did you get this, she said. Not a question. The flatness in her voice made it something else. My office has a secondary intake channel. For documents that don't clear standard counsel review. He paused. It exists specifically because standard counsel review is not always neutral, she said. Yes. So you built a system to catch what the counsel buries. She set the document on her knee. Smoothed the fold with her thumb. And my report came through that system. 4 months ago. She went still. 4 months ago she had still been employed. Still filing quarterly assessments and attending Interpack briefings and believing, with the specific stubborn faith of someone who had nothing else to anchor to, that the work meant something. That someone somewhere was reading it and it was accumulating into something larger than itself. 4 months ago he had her report. You read it 4 months ago, she said slowly. And then 3 weeks ago you refused to attend the summit. Stalled the vote. She looked at him. Because of what I wrote. He didn't look away. Partly. Your report was one of several that informed my decision. But it was the one you kept. She nodded at the document on her knee. Physically. In your jacket. His jaw tightened. The first fully unguarded thing she'd seen from him. There and gone in under a second, but she caught it. She was good at catching things people almost hid. Yes, he said. The car moved through another intersection. The rain had thickened. She could hear it now against the roof, not the fine, cold mist of the alley but something with more weight behind it. She should have felt something warm about this. She recognized the shape of it, the version of this story where a powerful man had read her words and acted on them and kept the evidence close to his chest for 4 months. That version had a certain gravity to it. A pull. She felt the pull. And then she felt what was underneath the pull. The bar tonight, she said. You knew I'd be there. Silence. Caius. His name in her mouth for the first time. She watched something move through his expression at the sound of it, there and gone. You knew. I was informed you frequented. You were informed. She turned to face him fully now. The document crinkled under her hand. Someone told you where I'd be tonight. And you were already there. Already sitting in the corner. Already, she stopped. The pieces were assembling again with that horrible clicking logic. The men at the bar. The ones looking for you. They weren't a coincidence either, were they? He said nothing. Which was everything. You let me walk over to you, she said. You knew who I was. You knew about my report. You knew about my position. Her voice was still quiet. Still level. She hated how level it was. And you sat there and let me make a fool of myself with it. She laughed, a short, airless sound. With a marriage joke. And then you told me to sit down. Elara. Don't. She moved the document off her knee. Set it on the seat between them, the same way he'd placed the business card on the bar table. A deliberate return. Was any of it real? The explanation. The summit. The act. She searched his face. Or was that the part where you make me feel like a person so I stop asking the right questions? His hands were no longer still. Everything I told you is true, he said. I believe that. She looked at the rain-dark window. I also believe you chose tonight. Chose that bar. Chose to let this play out exactly the way it did. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. And I want to know why. The car stopped. She hadn't noticed them slowing. Outside the window. A building she recognized. Old stone. Iron gates. The Western Pack Council's regional headquarters. Closed at midnight. Dark in every window. Except one. Third floor. Corner office. A light burning. Her breath fogged the glass. You're not just explaining yourself, she said. You're handing me something. She turned from the window. What do you need from me, Caius? And for the first time all evening. For the first time since she'd watched him across a crowded bar and felt her next breath come out wrong. He looked away. He looked away for exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. Old habit. The kind of counting that kept her grounded when the ground was doing something unreliable beneath her feet. 1. His jaw worked slightly. Something being decided. 2. His hands settled on his knees. The tension in his fingers releasing not from calm, but from resolution. 3. The rain against the roof. The idle engine. The lit window on the third floor throwing pale gold onto whetstone below. 4. He looked back. The council is going to pass Expansion Act 7, he said. Not tonight. Not this month. But the vote will come again, and next time they will have quorum regardless of my attendance. He held her gaze. The only thing that stops it permanently is a formal challenge filed under Pact constitutional law. Section 12. She knew Section 12. Every territorial liaison knew Section 12 the way they knew their own name. Not because it came up often, but because it was the kind of law that existed at the edges of everything, the pressure valve, the last mechanism before something irreversible happened. Section 12 allowed a formal challenge to any Pact legislation that demonstrably impacted Omega-occupied territories without adequate Omega representation in the drafting process. It required 2 things. A documented record of impact reports, assessments, evidence accumulated over time. And a challenger with standing. Someone who had been directly, demonstrably affected by the legislation or its political fallout. Someone like her. She heard herself breathe. My reports, she said. 8 months of documented impact assessment. Submitted through proper channels and suppressed. He reached into his jacket again, unhurried, like he'd been carrying this conversation for months and had simply been waiting for the moment to set it down. He produced a drive. Small. Unremarkable. Placed it on the seat beside the document she'd returned to him. The secondary intake copies. Every one. She looked at the drive. Did not touch it. You need me to file the challenge, she said. You're the only person with both the documentation and the legal standing to do it. His voice was even. Factual. Former employees of dissolved positions qualify as directly impacted parties under Section 12 language. Your termination, the restructuring. It created standing you didn't have before. The specific, horrible irony of that settled into her chest like cold water. They had eliminated her position to redirect political fallout. And in doing so had handed her the exact legal standing required to challenge the legislation that had caused it. They made a mistake, she said quietly. Yes. When they let me go. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. Let it move through her without rushing it. Because there was something clarifying about it, not comforting, but clarifying. The way very cold air clarified things. Then she picked up the thread she'd set down. The bar tonight, she said. You chose it. You chose the timing. Yes. You were going to approach me. Yes. And then I walked over first. She looked at him. And said what I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not the not-quite smile from before. Something smaller. More private. Yes, he said. And you told me to sit down. You were already sitting before I finished the sentence. She looked at the drive on the seat. At the document beside it. At the lit window on the third floor of a building that represented 6 years of her life, and before that the lives of people whose territories were currently at risk because 3 council members wanted to expand into land that didn't belong to them. She thought about the 60-day notice in her coat pocket. About restructured. About 6 years of careful and correct and precise. About the report they hadn't let her submit that he had been carrying in his jacket for 4 months. She picked up the drive. Felt the weight of it. Negligible. Practically nothing. If I file this challenge, she said, it will take months. The council will push back. They'll come after my credibility, my record, everything I. Yes. And you'll. I'll stand behind the challenge formally. Full Alpha King endorsement. A pause. For whatever that's worth to you. She turned the drive over in her fingers. Thought about what it was worth. Thought about what she was worth. A question she'd been answering wrong for 6 years. I want an office, she said. He blinked. The first fully surprised thing she'd seen from him. A real one, she continued. Not junior liaison. Not restructurable. Something with actual teeth. She met his eyes. And I want my name on the challenge documentation as lead filer. Not a footnote. Not a supporting party. A long pause. Done, he said. She closed her fingers around the drive. Outside, the rain intensified. The light in the third-floor window flickered once. And somewhere in the space between his answer and her silence, something shifted, not between them, not yet, but inside her. The specific, quiet shift of a woman who had just remembered what she was worth. And decided to act like it. The drive was warm in her closed fist. Not from heat. From holding. From the specific pressure of a decision made and not yet released into the world where it would become real and irreversible and hers to carry. She was still looking at the lit window on the third floor when she spoke. I need to know one more thing, she said. He waited. The proposal. She kept her eyes on the window. The pale gold light on wet stone. The joke. When I walked over and said what I said. She paused. You didn't laugh. No. Most people would have laughed. I'm aware. So why didn't you? The rain on the roof. The idle engine. For seconds of silence that had a different texture than his others, not controlled, not considered. Something more unguarded than that. Because it didn't strike me as funny, he said. She turned from the window. He was looking at her with that complete, unhurried attention. The kind she'd felt from across a crowded bar before she'd known his name or his title or the fact that he'd been carrying her words in his jacket for 4 months. The kind that didn't categorize or assess. Just received. Caius. His name in her mouth again. Easier this time. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. He reached across the seat. Not toward her, toward the document she'd returned to him. He picked it up and held it for a moment, and she watched his hands. Those still, tense hands that had told her more about him all evening than anything he'd said. I'd been Alpha King for 11 years, he said. In that time I have attended approximately 400 formal functions, signed off on more legislation than I can accurately count, and had exactly 0 conversations that I thought about afterward. He set the document down. I read your report in my office at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and by the time I finished it I was angry in a way I hadn't been in years. A pause. Not at you. At the fact that someone had been paying that quality of attention to something that mattered, and the system had just swallowed it. She held very still. I looked you up the next morning, he continued. Found you were still employed. Then 3 weeks later you weren't. Something moved through his jaw. I should have moved faster. You couldn't have known they'd. I should have moved faster, he said again. Quietly. Firmly. The kind of sentence a person said when they were not looking for absolution. When they were just stating the cost of a mistake clearly so it couldn't be softened into something more comfortable. She understood that. More than she expected to. She looked down at the drive in her hand. The challenge will take months, she said again. Not a protest. A recalibration. Yes. And during that time I'll need access to council records. Research support. Probably legal counsel familiar with constitutional PAC law. All available. And the men at the bar tonight. Riven and others. Will not be a concern after tomorrow. She nodded slowly. Filed it. Moved forward. I need to go back, she said. Jade doesn't know where I am. Of course. He signaled the driver with 2 quiet words she didn't catch. The car began to move. Ms. Voss. Elara, she said. If we're going to be filing constitutional challenges together, you can use my name. Something settled in his expression. Not the not quite smile. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, for the first time all evening, like rest. Elara, he said. The car moved back through rain-washed streets toward the bar and Jade in the ordinary Wednesday night that had stopped being ordinary approximately 2 hours ago. She looked out the window. Felt the drive in her hand. The weight of it negligible, practically nothing, and somehow the heaviest thing she'd carried in years. Caius, she said, to the rain-dark glass. Yes. The next time you decide to orchestrate a situation involving me, she let a beat pass. Tell me first. A pause. That seems fair, he said. The bar appeared through the rain. Jade was visible through the window, still at the bar, still on her phone, completely unbothered. Elara almost smiled. Almost. Her hand closed tighter around the drive. And somewhere beneath the pine and cold water and that deep wordless underneath, beneath all of it, something settled. Not between them. Not yet. But close. Close enough that when she reached for the door handle, she paused. One breath. You never answered, she said. Why you didn't laugh? He was quiet for a moment that had weight and texture and something she would think about later, in the 60-day apartment, holding a drive that contained 8 months of her own careful attention. Because when you walked across that bar, he said quietly, and said what you said. A beat. It was the first thing anyone had offered me in 11 years that wasn't calculated. The door handle was cold under her fingers. She didn't move. Not yet, because his words were still in the air between them, the first thing anyone had offered me in 11 years that wasn't calculated, and she understood, with the particular clarity that only comes after everything else has been stripped away, that some moments deserve more than a door closing on them. She released the handle. Turned. He was watching her. Of course he was. That complete, patient attention that had found her across a crowded bar before she'd known his name. Before she'd known anything and hadn't looked away once. Say it again, she said. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. You were the first thing, he said quietly, that wasn't calculated. Something in her chest cracked open. Not broke. Not shattered. Opened the way a window opens. The way cold clean air moves through a room that has been closed too long. She felt it move through her from sternum to throat and she let it because she was done being precise about the wrong things and she was done closing windows and she was done making herself small enough to keep. I wrote that report, she said, at my kitchen table. At midnight. In my pajamas. Because I couldn't sleep and I couldn't stop thinking about people who were going to lose their homes to legislation that called them a dispute. Her voice stayed even. Barely. I didn't write it for recognition. I wrote it because it needed to exist. I know, he said. And you read it at 2 in the morning. I couldn't put it down. And you got angry. On behalf of people I'd never met. He held her gaze. On behalf of you. Who had been paying that quality of attention for 8 months and been swallowed whole for it. Something moved through his jaw. Yes. I was angry. She crossed the distance between them before she decided to. 3 steps. The width of a car seat. The length of everything she'd been holding at arm's reach all evening. She sat facing him and took his hands, both of them, her fingers through his, and held on with the quiet, unperforming strength of a woman who had finally located the thing she hadn't known she was looking for. His breath changed. She felt it, the slight unevenness of it, the way the stillness he carried everywhere shifted into something less controlled and more alive. His hands held hers back with a pressure that said everything his measured voice was still finding words for. I'm not easy, she said. I know. I argue. I file challenges. I write reports at midnight about things that matter to me and I don't apologize for caring. I know. His thumb moved across her knuckles. That slow, attentive tracing that made her feel seen at the cellular level. Elara. I know. And you, she searched his face. The gray eyes. The jaw that went tight when he was feeling something he hadn't authorized yet. The hands that were never fully still when she was near him. You've been untouchable for 11 years. Yes. That doesn't fix in a night. No, he agreed. It doesn't, so we go slowly. Something settled across his features. That quiet thing. The resting thing. Like a man who had been carrying something enormous setting it down somewhere safe for the first time. "We go slowly," he said. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. Just that. Just the warmth of it. The press of two foreheads in a rain-soaked car on a Wednesday night with the whole long complicated future sitting between them like something patient. His exhale was slow. Unguarded. The most honest sound she'd heard from him all evening. Her eyes closed. His scent surrounded her completely, pine and cold water and the deep wordless underneath that she finally had a name for. Safe. That was what it was. That was what it had been trying to tell her since the first breath. Safe. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The rain softened on the roof. His hands held hers. Her forehead stayed against his. And something that had been running. Some part of her that had been in motion for 6 years, precise and careful and braced for the next restructuring, went still. Completely. Finally. Still. 6 months later, the challenge passed unanimously. The territories held. The office had her name on the door, not junior, not liaison. Lead constitutional advocate. Western Pack Council. And on a Wednesday night, because some things deserve to come full circle, he walked into a bar. Sat in the corner. Completely, unnaturally still. She walked over. 11 steps this time. She sat down across from him and looked at him with the particular expression she'd developed over 6 months, the one that said she saw every layer of him and had decided, every single morning, to stay. "You should marry me," she said. Not a joke. Not this time. He reached into his jacket. Not a business card. Something small. Something that caught the bar light and held it. He set it on the table between them. "I was hoping," he said quietly, "you'd say that." She looked at it. Looked at him. And for the first time all evening, for the first time in 6 months of slowly and carefully and choosing each other every single day. She laughed. Really laughed. The kind that reached her eyes. The kind that stayed. He watched her like she was the only thing in the room. She was. She always had been.